So hello and welcome back to Writing Off the Deep End.
Yeah.
I'm Geoffrey Edwards.
And I'm Mary Thaler. And today we're going to be talking about dramatic writing.
Right, so again, something that we've both been playing with in different ways.
Let's start with yours. Now, you've been writing an opera.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, we actually presented the opera in a kind of finished format. It ended up being a virtual opera, but regardless of the form it was actually presented in, it still required writing a libretto. Right?
Yes.
And when I first looked into it, I thought, I tried to find guidebooks on writing a libretto, but there aren't any.
Which is funny because there's a million how to write books on how to write your novel, how to write your short story. But maybe opera writing is this closed secret society of
I found a very, very old book from the 1920s.
Yeah.
But it was more an analysis of the 19th century operas, and then suggested how one might use it in the 20th century.
Now,
and I've since found a few articles, but not at the time I wrote it. I had no guidelines.
You did watch opera and enjoy opera.
I loved opera.
Right?
I loved opera.
You had a sense of the
yes, and it happened because I've been writing these science fiction novels, and I encountered some people in the music department at the university where I work, and they said, "Well, we have this project to develop an opera. We've applied once and been turned down, but one of the reasons we were turned down is we didn't have a scenario." And I said, "Well, I'm writing this science fiction stuff. Would you be interested?" And they said yes. So it was a kind of opportunistic context. And so we developed. We applied for funding, and we were awarded relatively. It wasn't enough to do a full scale opera, but it was enough to get the thing up and into a certain kind of shape. So
now, how did you know that the story, which you'd already written as prose, could be adapted as an opera? Did you see operatic elements in it?
Well, I think my work is operatic in a kind of way, yes. But the challenge, no, because it's large canvas. It has both personal dilemmas and societal dilemmas that are being worked out simultaneously. So this kind of lends itself to an operatic treatment, I think.
Okay.
But the challenge was a novel doesn't make an opera. An opera is a smaller piece than a novel generally. I mean,
yes.
And so I had to take the novel and cut it back, and we also only had enough money to do. We weren't doing a full opera, like a 2-hour opera or a 90-minute opera. We decided we would do a 20-minute opera. So that meant one scene.
Yeah, there's a lot that needed to be
pared down, and finding a way. And it's also, it's a team effort. So you've got the. I was the librettist. You've got the composers. There were 2 composers involved in the project. I had a colleague who was a designer that I got involved doing the designing, and I had another colleague who was a choreographer that we got doing dance sequences. But all of these pieces had to jive together. Yeah. And so I think I went through 7 drafts for the 7 major drafts for the libretto, where it constantly had to be updated. We're also trying to make the opera interactive, which had its own challenges.
Interactive with the audience.
With the audience, and that had additional constraints. So I think for the earlier episode I said I love constraints. Well, sometimes you can get so many constraints it's hard to figure out where to go at all.
Because we recently did an episode where we talked about community, and we talked about how writing is very solitary and that can negatively impact your mental health to be a writer all alone. This sounds like the opposite.
It is
experience.
not. Well, I mean, you're at home doing the work.
Yeah.
But then you have to bring it in and share it with other people, and then that are the constraints that come into it. So, but
ultimately enriches.
And I like that.
Yeah.
I have to say that so it's written so it's a libretto, so it's written in verse form, if you like.
Yeah.
Although there are some recital parts, but, and I loved the discipline of working out the rhythmic sections, the verse parts, to a particular story component with a particular singer in mind in some cases, and so I loved that part of the work. It was incredibly fun to do. Yeah. Yeah. How did you pick the scene? You said you had to pick a single scene of what was essentially a novella, right? Yeah. Well, it has this problem because for an opera or any dramatic production, and originally we were thinking about actually staging this. Yeah. So we had to come up with a concept for a location. So it was inside. It was taking part inside this story, which was about a city that's floating in the atmosphere, and the city was the sort of structure of the city was worked out, but you couldn't deal with the whole city. You had to pick a particular place, and so the story started out in this one particular location on the edge of the city, and we ended up framing it so that that location would be the same frame regardless of which part of the story we were looking at. So some of the action shifts slightly, but we don't actually change location, right? This is what they used to call the three unities. Exactly. I don't know my theater history well enough, but I know they used to talk about the three unities, that it should all be in one setting and about one group of people and in a certain span of time. Right. That's actually a practical matter. It's a practical matter. So in fact, if you go to any modern staging dramatic piece, it tends to be the way things are done. Yeah. But obviously for a small 20-minute thing, you couldn't expect to do... And there's an elegance to it that's rather lovely. Yeah. Now, a libretto is actually... How much text are we talking about? Like, each song is only a few lines. Am I right? Well, it depends, right? So, obviously, the opera that I wrote was one that reflects my style, as opposed to other styles, and certainly some of the discussions we had with the musicians suggested that it could be sparser than it was. Because it's science fiction, and so the problem with science fiction is you have to get a certain amount of exposition out in order to explain what's going on. The famous world building. Exactly, and so unlike an opera that would take place in an existing context where you can do things very, very quickly, in this context you had to spend a certain amount of time laying these things out. So the density of text inside the songs was probably a bit higher than one would normally see in an opera, right? But I was working with really good composers, and they managed to figure out. I think I wrote the main chorus piece. I think I wrote 3 verses with the chorus between each of them, and the composer only wrote the music for the first 2 verses with the interlude. And left out the 3rd verse. Okay. But it kind of worked. It didn't really need the 3rd. So that's that teamwork. Not all the decisions get to be yours. No, too. There's a kind of letting go of control in this genre. Yeah. So that was interesting. Wow. And we had written. I had written another song. And I was working, so I had another musical consultant, an old friend, who was very, very good in that. And she said, your story is missing a piece. You need an area that gives this feeling of intimate and the struggle that the main character is going through. You need an area that expresses that. Yeah. So I'd written the full libretto and been working it for a while, and I added in a new area that would do this role. and it made the piece, so.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a really good experience. You're thinking of doing another one, right?
I had applied for money and got turned down, but, and now I'm retired, so I'm not sure if I'm going to do that again, but I'm certainly enamored of the form enough that I'd like to find another opportunity to do that. Yeah. Okay, so I think we finished for opera. We decided actually to split this section on dramatic writing into two pieces. So this first piece dealt with opera, and next week we're going to talk about theatre, because Mary's done a bit more work with the theatre. The opera was mostly my work, but the theatre one is mostly Mary's work. So
so join us in the next episode, and thank you so much for watching.
And don't forget to subscribe if you like what you see. And if you're on the podcast, just come back and listen to us again.